June 1944. The invasion of Normandy. We talk about the bullets. We talk about the gasoline. We talk about the blood plasma. Logistics wins wars, right? The US Army shipped millions of tons of equipment to France, but in the dusty airstrips of Normandy, 2 weeks after the invasion, the American soldier was facing a crisis that General Eisenhower hadn't planned for. He was thirsty, and he didn't want water with chlorine tablets. He didn't want lukewarm coffee, and he definitely didn't want the warm, bitter cider that the local French farmers were offering. He wanted the taste of home. He wanted a cold, crisp beer. There was just one problem. The US Army was officially dry in the combat zone. Alcohol was prohibited. Or, if it was available, it was the British kind dark, heavy, and served at room temperature. To an American GI, warm beer is a crime against humanity. So, what do you do when the generals say no? You turn to the pilots! This is the story of how the Royal Air Force and the US Army Air Forces used the most advanced, expensive fighter planes in the world not to kill Nazis, but to deliver kegs of lager to the front lines. They modified bomb racks. They scrubbed out fuel tanks. They invented the first supersonic beer coolers in history. Hi, I'm Ray. Today on G.I.Stories, we're taking a break from the tragedy of war to look at the ingenuity of thirst. Welcome to Operation Joy Juice. Chapter 1. The Dust and the Drought, July 1944. The beachhead is secured. The Allies are pushing inland. The engineers have built temporary airstrips right in the middle of the French cornfields. These were dusty, hot, miserable places. The ground crews, the mechanics, the armorers worked 16-hour days, keeping the planes flying. They were eating rations and drinking water that tasted like swimming pool chemicals. Across the Channel, in England, the pubs were open. But there was a cultural clash. The British drink their ales at cellar temperature, about 55 degrees Fahrenheit, to an American raised on his skull Budweiser or Schlitz that felt like drinking soup. Furthermore, getting beer from England to France was a logistical nightmare. Ships were prioritized for ammo and fuel. Beer was at the bottom of the list. The High Command's official stance was, alcohol reduces combat efficiency. But any sergeant will tell you, alcohol increases morale, and morale wins battles. So, a black market emerged, and the kings of the black market were the pilots. Fighter pilots are a special breed. They fly fast, they disobey rules, and they move between England and France in 45 minutes. While a ship took 2 days to cross the Channel, a Spitfire or a P-47 Thunderbolt could fly to London, pick up supplies, and be back in Normandy before lunch. The question was, how do you carry the cargo? A fighter plane has a tiny cockpit. There is no trunk. Chapter 2. The Spitfire Pub. The British pilots were the first to figure it out. The Spitfire Mk9 had pylons under the wings designed to carry bombs or extra fuel tanks. Some genius mechanic at an RAF squadron looked at a standard 18-gallon beer keg called a kilderkin and realized something. Hey, that keg is roughly the same aerodynamic shape as a 500-pound bomb. They got to work. They fabricated custom brackets. They attached wooden beer kegs to the bomb racks of the It looked ridiculous. Imagine a deadly weapon of war, designed to dogfight the Luftwaffe, carrying 2 wooden barrels of ale under its wings. They called it Mod 30. If a superior officer asked, they said it was a depth charge testing modification or special propaganda leaflet containers. But here is the genius part, the physics of beer. If you buy a warm beer in London and fly it to France at low altitude, it arrives warm. But if you fly at 15,000 feet, the air temperature is well below freezing. The pilots discovered that if they climbed to high altitude during the Channel crossing, the freezing slipstream would chill the beer perfectly. By the time they landed in Normandy, the kegs were ice cold. There was only one catch. Wooden kegs aren't designed for 300 miles per hour. Sometimes, the air pressure would blow the bung out, and the pilot would arrive with empty kegs in a sticky plane. But when it worked, it was magic. A Spitfire would land, taxi to the end of the runway, and within seconds, a swarm of mechanics would surround it with mugs, canteens, and helmets. Chapter 3. The Norwegian solution. The most famous photo of this practice comes from the Norwegian Wing Squadron 332. These guys were Vikings, flyings. They missed home, they missed cold drinks, and they hated warm English beer. They took the mod XXX to a new level. Look at this picture. Those aren't bombs. Those are metal beer kegs with custom aerodynamic nose cones fitted to them to reduce drag. They literally streamlined the beer. They claimed these were long-range dustbins for carrying mail. The mail sloshed around a lot and foamed when opened, but nobody complained. But the Spitfire had a limited payload. 2 kegs meant maybe 36 gallons. That's enough for a party, but not for a battalion. Enter the Americans and the massive P-47 Thunderbolt. Before we get to the American method, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever tasted jet fuel or high-octane aviation? Gasoline. It tastes like burning metal and poison. Now, imagine drinking beer that has been stored inside a used gas tank. That is the sacrifice these men were willing to make. If you appreciate the lengths a soldier will go to for a cold one, like this video and subscribe to G.I.Stories. Now, let's see how the U.S. Army industrialized the beer run. Chapter 4. The metallic taste of freedom. The American P-47 Thunderbolt was a beast. It was the SUV of fighter planes. It could carry a massive load. Under its belly, it carried a drop tank-a-large, teardrop-shaped auxiliary fuel tank holding 150 gallons. Normally, you fill this with fuel to fly to Berlin, and when it's empty, you drop it. The American pilots in the 56th Fighter Group realized, wait, 150 gallons is a lot of beer, but you can't just put a keg inside. You have to fill the tank itself. The problem was the lining. These tanks were lined with a rubbery compound or galvanized metal that reeked of 100-octane gasoline. So, the crew chiefs developed a cleaning ritual. They would take a brand new drop tank. They would steam clean it for hours. They would rinse it with boiling water. They would scrub it with industrial soap. Then, they would fly to England. They would taxi to a brewery and fill the tank with British beer. The flight back was delicate. Beer is carbonated. If you climb too high, the air pressure drops, and the beer expands. It foams. It can burst the tank. If you fly too low, it gets warm. The pilots had to find the Goldilocks altitude. High enough to freeze, low enough to keep the fizz. Usually around 12,000 to 15,000 feet. When they landed, the beer was cold, but it wasn't perfect. Despite the steam cleaning, the beer often had a distinct aftertaste of rubber and leaded gasoline. Did the soldiers care? Absolutely not. One veteran recalled, it tasted like the finest champagne, with just a hint of airplane engine. Chapter 5. The Zemke's Wolfpack Incident. One of the most famous units, the 56th Fighter Group known as Zemke's Wolfpack, got ambitious. They wanted wine and champagne for a party to celebrate their 500th aerial victory. They sent Ob 47 with a clean drop tank to a captured airfield in newly liberated France, where they heard there was a wine cellar. The pilot filled the tank with red wine. But wine is corrosive, and red wine picks up metallic flavors instantly. When he returned and they tapped the tank, the wine was purple sludge that tasted like aluminum and rubber sealant. They drank it anyway. The hangover reportedly grounded the entire squadron for 2 days. How did they hide this from the generals? They didn't really. There are stories of generals coming for inspections, seeing a P-47 dripping condensation on a hot day, and asking, why is that fuel tank sweating? The crew chief would say, experimental high-octane coolant. Sir? The general would sniff the air, smell the hops, smile, and walk away. Ever John knew. As long as the pilots were shooting down Nazis the next day, nobody signed the paperwork to stop it. Chapter 6. The Champagne Spitfire. Not everyone used dirty tanks. There is the story of Flight Lieutenant Lloyd Berryman. He flew a Spitfire. Before D-Day, his squadron promised a massive party. Berryman didn't want bulk beer. He wanted quality. He and his crew managed to fit bottles, actual glass bottles of beer and cider in, to the gun bays of the Spitfire wings. The Spitfire had compartments for the 303 machine guns. Berriman removed the ammo belts and packed the spaces with bottles wrapped in socks to prevent them from breaking due to vibration. He flew the mission, chilled the bottles at altitude, and landed. The vibration of the Merlin engine had shaken the bottles so much that when they opened the first one, it exploded like a geyser. They had to let the bottles rest for 24 hours. It was the longest 24 hours of the war. Chapter 7. The legacy of Joy Juice. Eventually, the supply lines caught up. By late 1944, official shipments of beer were arriving in France. The breweries of Milwaukee and St. Louis sent millions of cans of olive drab beer to the troops. The era of the flying pub was over, but those few weeks in the summer of 1944 remain legendary. It showed the bond between the flyboys in the sky and the grunts on Tegron. The pilots risked their lives flying unarmed heavy aircraft into war zones, not to drop bombs, but to bring a moment of happiness to their friends. It was logistical disobedience at its finest. It proved that you can draft a man, you can put him in a uniform, and you can send him to hell. But you cannot stop him from trying to get a cold beer on a Friday night. Conclusion. So, was it worth it? Drinking beer that tasted like gasoline. Every veteran I've read about says, yes, best beer of my life. What about you? Would you drink out of a used fuel tank if you had been stuck in a foxhole for a month? Let me know in the comments. Now, we've had some fun today. Subscribe to G.I. Stories. Cheers and dismissed.